The moment the door was raised and the whip was flourished, I started running round and round. Then back to the cage, to be wheeled off to my home, which I found cleaned and washed and with food kept for me. That was very welcome.
I'd have nothing more to do for the rest of the day. Life was not so bad after all. Captain was not such a monster after all.
I began to respect him for his capabilities. I began to admire him. A sort of worshipful attitude was developing in me. I had thought in the jungle that I was supreme.
Now that was gone. I was a defeated king, and Captain was the unquestioned suzerain. After all, what he expected of me seemed so simple. Instead of understanding it, I allowed myself to be beaten, and suffered through ignorance.
And running around the enclosure was quite beneficial for one cooped up in a cage all day. But soon I was to realize that that was not all. It was only a preparation.
When I became an adept at running, I was ready for the next stage of education. The more difficult part was still to come. I was let out into the enclosure as usual one day, Captain alert as ever with his chair and whip.
At the crack of the whip, I started running as usual, but I found my passage obstructed by a strange object which I later knew as a stand, placed across my path. I checked my pace, at which he let out a cry, "Jump! Go on, jump!" and the whip came lashing on me. All the good name I had earned and the good feeling I had developed for Captain seemed to be lost.
I felt infuriated at the lashing and felt like jumping on him, but he held that terrible chair. Now I know a chair is a worthless, harmless piece of furniture, but at that time I dreaded the sight of it. It appeared to me a mighty engine of destruction.
How Captain and men like him could ever have realized how a chair would look to a tiger is really a wonder. Now I have enough understanding of life to smash a chair if it is flourished before my eyes. But then a chair looked terrible.
When I was lashed, once again all the old terror of not knowing what I should do came back to me. My friends who had advised me on the first day were not there. They had been taken away to some other part of the camp by their trainers. It was a vast world where many activities took place according to Captain's plans.
I stumbled on the obstacle and kicked it away and ran on my usual round. This enraged Captain, and he came dashing behind me shouting in a frenzy, "Jump! Jump!" and applying the whip liberally. I thought that this man was unsteady, alternating between occasional sanity and general madness.
At the moment he was in the latter phase. What did he mean by bothering me like this, forcing me to do some obscure act? I ran hither and thither and tried to run back into the cage. That made him more angry.
He came after me in a delirium and hit me as I crouched trembling in the cage. He shouted and ordered me out. I jumped out and started running round and came against the hurdle once again, knocked it down and ran hither and thither and went back into the cage. Red in the face and panting like an engine, Captain ordered, "Take the devil away.
Off rations for 3 days, not even water, and he will come round, you will see." He kept glaring at me. Now I follow human speech, by the grace of my master, but in those days I was dense and did not know what the word, jump, meant, and suffered untold misery. Today I would have immediately understood that Captain wished me to cross the hurdle in a jump and proceed to go round, come back to the hurdle and jump over it again and again until he was satisfied that I had mastered the art.
Absolutely a pointless accomplishment, but Captain had set his heart on it. On the day I understood and performed it, he was beside himself with joy. He stroked my back with the whip handle as I gratefully rushed back to my cage and said, "Good.
Keep it up, now you have earned your dinner." Every day I was put through this exercise. After a course of this, the next was only an elaboration of it. A few more obstacles were placed along the course of my run and they had to be cleared with the same smartness.
My only aim now was to please Captain, and when I did that I got the reward, pieces of meat and water and undisturbed sleep in my cage. The hurdles were of different kinds, some labyrinth-like, some so twisted that I feared I might get permanently crooked. Into some I had to crawl on my belly and then out. Some hurdles would lead me back to my starting point, and I had to clear them at the same speed, while he went gyrating like a spring doll, cracking his whip and commanding, come on, don't waste your time." He held a watch in his hand and timed my run and movements, so that whatever perverse design he might have, I had to come through to the starting point at the same time.
During the actual performance, he would announce, Raja is now running at a speed of 60 miles an hour, the pace he generally maintains while chasing game in the jungle. From his starting point in the ring back to the same spot in 2 minutes 5 seconds. Whether he goes one round or several rounds, he will maintain the same speed.
After that, you will see him go through several kinds of obstacles, hurdles and mazes. You will see, ladies and gentlemen, that whatever the hurdle, he clears it and finishes his round within the same time, adjusting his pace appropriately. He is uncanny in his timing.
Anyone who wants to prove that he takes more time and I am wrong, is welcome to step in here and hold this stopwatch I have in hand. Anyone who can prove that he takes even one more second than what I have claimed will get a reward of 500 rupees. And he flourished 5 fresh 100 rupee notes in the air. Quite a few in the audience came down but, finding that they were expected to stand within the enclosure to try their luck, withdrew.
Captain had a vast army working for him, trapeze artists, clowns, trainers of monkeys and parrots and so on, horse riders, elephant and camel men. Each one handled a particular animal and had influence over it. There was one who could even make the hippo climb some height and occupy a stool. Every one of them had his peculiarities and problems and had to be kept in good humor as well as discipline.
Captain's wife, Rita, was at the head of the trapeze team. He had many workers, who pulled, pushed, unrolled carpets and set up fences, furniture, and various other properties, and changed them quickly for the next item. As I became an established member of that circus, I was not isolated anymore, but was allowed to stay around Captain in my cage.
Thus I was able to watch him all day. And I also picked up a lot of information from other gossiping animals when we were kept near each other. The chimp was always bursting with news.
Whenever we gathered together, our main topic was the boss. He had other animals including a lion, which remained aloof but kept roaring incessantly, stimulating all other animals to make a noise. When Captain wanted quiet, he would go round cracking his whip and shout, "Shut up," in a thundering voice, overwhelming the lion's roar.
At that time, I only knew that he had some concern for me, but I was not ripe enough to grasp the meaning of what was happening. Only in recollection now can I appreciate Captain's energy and power and the variety of tasks he was able to perform, to be successful and provide all that variety and quantity of food for us, also appear on stage, and do a great deal of off-stage work too, such as checking accounts, making payments, handling his men and so forth, activities that would go on far into the night. In the midst of all this, he would also be thinking of new turns and tricks and novelties to announce to the public.
He called his a creative circus. After getting an idea, he would shut himself in his tent, do some paperwork, call up his chief executive, and say, "Here is a new idea, see how it can be worked out." It was not his habit to consult but only to issue orders. He would just state what he wanted done and then tell his staff to achieve it in practical terms.
They were not to say yes or no but only proceed with it. Now Captain called his chief executive and said, "It's time to give a new twist to the trapeze items. It will be a sensation if the trapeze act also includes 2 somersaults in the air and then a passage through a ring of fire. I've thought out the details to some extent."
I realized that a fireproof endovest for the artists, which doesn't show, will be the first requisite. Here's a sketch I have made of the position of the ring in relation to the swings and the net below. You work out the mechanical details and modalities. Bring your report tomorrow morning. The executive came up next day with the report, after working on it all night, but said, "Madam is not for any change." Captain brooded over it for a moment and said, "Put Laila in Madam's place."
The rehearsals must begin soon. Laila was number 2 in the team. This issue precipitated a domestic crisis. That night much shouting could be heard in their home tent.
Madam threatened to quit the show once and for all. She said, "I'm not prepared to spare any of my girls or set fire to myself just to please your fancy. I'm not an orthodox wife preparing for sati." He retorted, "Look, don't talk like that.
I'm not planning to set fire to you, you know that. I'm only thinking how we could give the public something new, some new thrills. Public must find it rather stale to see you and your girls in your satin tights swing up and down." Here his speech was cut short by the lady saying, "You think our items are cheap and that easy? Have you any idea how every second one's life is being risked? You think whipping and bullying dumb beasts the only great act? Why don't you come up on the swing at least once and try, instead of talking theories? You forget, my dear, that I did trapeze at one time. That's how I started, but I outgrew it. Naturally, you had to give it up, otherwise the swings might have snapped or the roof itself might have come down. Since you fancy your figure has remained unchanged, I am suggesting you try and put it to some use so as to make people say, this lady is capable of more than jumps and twists in the air, she can pass through fire rings so easily, being slim. Why don't you put your head down your lion's throat and sing a popular song? You are not suggesting anything original. I'm planning it, maybe for the Jubilee show. You are constantly talking of Jubilee.
What sort of a Jubilee are you celebrating? May I know? She asked cynically. He ignored her remark and continued, if you are not interested in the new trapeze act, keep off, that's all. The show will go on. Such a determined man that he planned, prepared, rehearsed this fiery act and presented it to the public later at what he called the Jubilee show.
Rita went through the act, unwilling to let Lila take her place. The accuracy and timing with which the artists performed their trapeze acts, somersaulted and shot through a flaming ring before coming to rest on the safety net below, was exciting and repeatedly applauded by the audience. But this happened at a later phase of my story.
Let me go back to my training period. After I had become an adept in racing over and through a variety of obstacles, I expected to be left alone. I was ignorant of the fact that it was only a preparation for another stage.
What Captain had in mind could not be guessed by anyone. He always allowed an interval between stages of training so that I'd live in an illusion of having nothing more to do. But just as I was resting, my cage would be drawn to the training enclosure and there I'd find Captain waiting, whip in hand.
When I saw him thus, I would wish we could talk it over and come to an understanding instead of going through the hard way to get a pat on my back for understanding his wishes. Today he held a new terror for me. It was not enough that I ran around fast and also through the hurdles.
At one point, while rounding a bend, I saw fire and shrank back. I thought, kill me now, but I won't go near the fire. I was reminded of the village fire when flaming torches nearly roasted me. I shrank back and naturally the whip came down and bruised me more than ever.
He would not allow me to retreat from the fire, nor go round it or away from it. He blocked all my movement with his person, shielded only with the chair, while his whip could reach me from quite a distance. The state I was in, I could have easily destroyed him without a trace. Driven by desperation, panic and fury, I had to content myself with roaring out, leave me alone, you monster. But he overshouted me, Raja, come on through that ring, in there, come on, come on. The uproar and pandemonium we both created must have been heard all over the town.
I snarled, showed my teeth, wrinkled my nose, opened my mouth and shut it, and growled as if the earth were rumbling. But he was unaffected and warded me off with his chair, and pushed me closer and closer to that fire. All my movement was restricted in such a way as to leave no room for me to move or turn except through the fire.
First time my belly was singed, but in course of time I could pass without touching the flames. And when I performed diligently, one became Captain's favorite again. With meat and water back in my cage, I was once again left to laze and live in the delusion that my trials had ended and I was going to live a happy and free life hereafter. The next piece of training was surprisingly mild.
I was driven on round and then stopped where a stool had been placed. I had to sit on it, dangling my tail on the floor. A saucer of milk was placed on a table.
I was again and again forced to sit up in front of the saucer with Captain howling, drink, 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 and holding his chair up. He bent down and put out his tongue over the saucer to indicate what I was expected to do. I watched completely baffled, but he was untiring in imitating the act of drinking off a saucer. Lower, lower, he was howling.
Put head down and tongue out, and he cracked the whip. When he did that, I knew that the next would be on my back. I was quite desperate to understand him.
Surely he was not expecting me to drink that white stuff in the saucer. It looked like poison to me. But there was no escape from it.
He hit me so hard while I had my head down that I had to bend further down with my tongue out. No sooner had my tongue touched the saucer than I was seized with nausea and a fit of sneezing. What stuff was it, tasting so awful? Later that day the chimp strolled along near my cage.
How I envied his freedom. I wished I could also go about like him. But a tiger seemed to have a curse on it. No one can tolerate the sight of a tiger walking freely about, being burdened with size, might, and the fierce makeup that nature has given us. What a blessing to be the stature of an ape. Human beings approve of him because he approximates to their idea of what a creature should be in appearance and size.
The ape was grinning as he clutched the bars of my cage and asked, "How did you like it?" "What?" I asked. "The milk in the saucer which you had to lick up." "Terrible," I said. "Why should I drink it?" "You will see for yourself soon."
Why, don't you like it? How can anyone like that terrible stuff? Human kids are brought up on it right from birth. Men think no end of it. Do you drink it? Yes, of course, I don't mind it, but I prefer banana and what they aptly call monkey nuts. Why do you have to drink it? Can't help it, when Captain thinks it is good for us, we have to take it. What is it made of? He answered, it is made by the cow inside, and is squeezed out by men every day. Every day? But don't they have to kill it to get it? It is drawn out without killing the cow, so that they are able to have it every day. It seemed to me a strange world into which I was drawn. I said, it is evil tasting.
Surprising it should be found in the cow, which itself tastes so good. I won't drink that stuff whatever may happen. Before I could ask for further explanations, he hopped down and was off. By the time I could get a pat of approval on my back from Captain, I had become resigned to the taste of milk.
After that, a new item cropped up. As I looked up from the saucer at a training session, I found seated opposite me across the table a goat, an extraordinary thing to happen. I thought I was being specially rewarded with fresh food for accepting the milk, though it made my head reel.
A goat sitting up with a tiger as an equal. What a crazy situation. No goat would ever dare do such a thing. Anyway, I'd accept the gift and get the milk taste out of my tongue. I gave a shout of joy and the usual victory cry before pouncing across the table.
But when I stirred, I was whipped back to my seat and the goat was withdrawn. When I was back in my seat, another pan of milk appeared and the goat was back in his seat. I could not understand.
This kind of jugglery was disturbing. Sitting on my haunches was irksome and painful. The sight of the pan of milk was offensive and the goat was appetizing. But what was happening was beyond my understanding.
What perversity that I should consume what I hated and leave what I would relish? There seemed to be an eerie indestructibility about the goat and the pan of milk. Any other goat would have run away or vanished into my belly. This sort of dodging and reappearing, I didn't like it.
It was confusing, maddening. I didn't like it at all. I went at it again and again, and it disappeared and reappeared after I had been whipped back to my seat. Ultimately, I realized that it'd be best to keep still and take no notice of the goat.
If it was not meant for me, why were they offering it? The ways of Captain were mysterious. Whatever he had in mind, he seemed to be able to express it only through violence. How I wished that he could speak my language or I his.
There was no meeting ground between us, but still we had so much to do with each other all the time. That was the irony of fate. Captain was convinced that if he bellowed deafeningly I'd understand, stupid fellow, although I had to admire him for several reasons.
Ultimately, by sheer doggedness, he made me realize that I was to ignore the goat. If I had realized it was only a dummy for purposes of practice, it'd have been quite simple. But it was so lifelike, I was deceived.
I ignored it now. I sat peacefully, hoping as usual that my trial was ended and that I could go back to my home. But there could be no such thing as the end in my life.
The end of one trouble was but the beginning of another. Here I was disciplined enough not to move a muscle in the presence of that supposed goat. I do not know at what point they had substituted the real one.
But it bleated and that roused me. I involuntarily tensed, but Captain was too watchful and shouted, "Stay back, Raja," and that was enough warning for me. The stupid goat forgot its perils and became greedy at the sight of the milk. It immediately put its head down and lapped the saucer dry, and sat up to look at me as if to ask, "What next?" Captain directed it with the slightest flourish of his whip and without any display of the chair.
He looked pleased at the performance of the goat. With a smile on his face, he ordered for more milk, just as I was feeling relieved that the terrible drink was gone. When another supply of milk came, he said, "Raja, now that milk is for you.
Lower your head and drink that milk." What an impossible torture. I'd have preferred to have that goat sitting and blinking before me. I couldn't understand what he kept it for. Milk indeed. I hesitated, noticed a slight movement of the whip and bent down to the saucer, pretended to lick the milk, and sat back, as well as I could.
Next it was the goat's turn. Captain ordered it with a slight wave of the whip, and the goat bent down and licked the plate dry. It was surprising how much milk that goat could consume.
It looked as if it were Captain's intention to fill the goat to bursting point. He filled up the saucer again and again. It was merciful of him not to order me to drink the whole lot each time. He was satisfied if I dampened my nose or tongue, and then I could resume my seat.
This went on all afternoon. The goat finished his portion first and then whatever remained in the plate after my show of drinking. Though I had by this time been forced to get used to the proximity of the goat, I began to hope that the goat might explode loudly with the quantities of the milk inside him, and when that happened they would surely pass him on to me as they would have no further use for him.
We had to be licking the milk alternately that whole day. I felt completely exhausted when I was allowed to return to my cage, and could hardly eat when my meat was brought in because of the lingering smell of milk. I just sank down and slept.
Next day I was put through a new set of exercises. I had to sit still until the goat had started lapping it up and then take my mouth to the saucer at the same time and pretend to enjoy the drink in his company. This was a trying moment as the proximity of the goat's head and its flavor was overpowering.
I was perplexed at the way the whole thing was working out. I was amazed at the foolhardiness of the goat, which enjoyed its milk notwithstanding possible annihilation any moment. We had to rehearse this piece day by day until I was supposed to cultivate a taste for milk and an apparent distaste for the goat.
When Captain was satisfied with the results, he made me rehearse the whole series, starting with running round through obstacles and fire, and coming to rest for a saucer of milk. He set special value on this part and announced it with fanfare for the Jubilee show, where it was to be presented as a 4-in-1 act. Before the Jubilee he presented me in single-item acts, each once a week. He announced me to the public as, that miracle Tiger Raja, the Magnificent.
I must have indeed looked grand and mighty with my yellow and black acquiring a special gloss, possibly through doses of milk imbibed each day. He explained that I was not an ordinary, commonplace tiger but an intelligent creature, almost human in understanding. He was prophetic. He can read the time. He always held up his stopwatch in my face before I started my round of runs, saying, "Mark the time, Raja, and keep up your speed." Captain presented his shows 6 months in a year in Malgudi town.
A team of men went round to the villages in the district clad in fancy costumes and with the beat of drums and a megaphone advertised the circus. They drove around village streets in a Model T Ford painted black and yellow to remind one of the tiger. They went up to Komal, the farthest village, nearly 50 kilometers from Malgudi.
On festivals and holidays the patrons arrived by bus, lorry, bullock carts, and bicycles for the show. Coming into the town for the circus was an exciting event for villagers, who turned up in family groups and camped in the town under the shade of trees, in the veranda of Albert Mission College, or in their wagons after unyoking the bullocks and leaving them to graze in the fields. At every show all seats in the galleries were taken, as were the benches and wooden chairs and the squatting space on bare ground not far from the stage. 6 cushioned seats were always kept in reserve for a hierarchy of local officials on whose goodwill depended Captain's survival.
When the monsoon set in October to November, the circus moved out of Malgudi to other centers in a long caravan, parading the animals, which made the circus known all along the way. The central office at Malgudi worked all through the year. At every show, Captain made a speech, sometimes autobiographical and sometimes to boost a special act, such as mine. He delivered his message in at least 3 languages, as he explained.
In Hindi, since it is our national language and given to us by Mahatma Gandhi himself. Also in English because, as our beloved respected leader Nehru put it, it opens a window on the world. In Tamil, because it is our mother tongue, in which our greatest poets like Kamban and Valluvar compose. Also the sublime inspiring patriotic songs of Bharati, who can ever forget them? Whatever the language, he spoke flamboyantly, always touching upon his personal life. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, Romans, and countrymen, as Shakespeare said, I love my circus and the animals that have made my business a success, and I have pitched my tent here because I love Malgudi. I love Malgudi because I was born and grew up here.
I was a backwoods boy, living and playing in the dust of Abu Lane. They sent me, hoping to make a scholar of me, to Albert Mission School, but fate willed it otherwise. I won't waste your time recounting my adventures while you are all eager to see the performance begin.
You will see my life history in book form, a shiny colorful brochure with his portrait on the cover, sold at the gate at cost price, so that young people may cultivate ambition and a spirit of adventure and bring our nation a great name. All that I wish to say is that the great circus master Dadhaji of Pune adopted me and trained me, though I looked like a vagrant and was indeed one, and he employed me at first to clean the stables and then taught me how to educate animals. I cannot begin the show without bowing in homage and gratitude to the memory of that great master. Captain was considerate and helped us conserve our energies by regulating our rest periods.
On off days he sent away all the herbivores to forage in the lower reaches of Mempi range. Camels, horses, elephants, and zebra went out in a sort of parade through the streets of Malgudi and returned in time for the next show. A set of animals always had at least 2 days rest between performances. He did a lot of paperwork beforehand, scheduling each animal's duty and off hours in a month.
He studied the roster containing the names of animals. He had christened every one of the animals in his collection, and drew up a sort of chart for each one of them. The most strenuous part of their lives was during the training period. At that stage he was unsparing, and if they perished during the training, he took it as an inevitable risk of his trade.
Once they were trained to perform, he viewed them as his assets to be protected, his own prosperity depending on their welfare. He bestowed special attention to my part of the work. It always came after the trapeze sequence, which was his wife's show.
He never made any speech for introducing her, a matter which made her grumble from time to time. But he just waved her off. Everyone knows what a grand team you lead. Your girls are famous and need no introduction. Also, it'd sound odd to boost one's wife. While your wit and eloquence are reserved only for the tiger and the rest, I suppose. Yes, they need introduction, not you. Why are we always talking like this? Something wrong with our horoscopes. Your horoscope and the tiger seem to be better matched, she would say.
Don't talk in that style. Someday you will be sorry that you have disturbed my mind. You don't realize that I need a calm mind and concentration in my work.
My mood must not be spoiled. As if I don't need a calm mind in my job. You think only of yourself and your tiger. I don't know why she was measuring herself against me all the time. Fancy anyone being jealous of a tiger. Yet it was not really so. Given her chance, I don't think she would have poisoned me.
She enjoyed being argumentative, that's all. They were a peculiar couple, devoted to each other but not betraying their feelings in speech. When I mentioned this subject to my master, later in life, and sought his verdict as to whether they were to be considered friendly or inimical to each other, he just smiled and said, "Human ties cannot be defined in just black and white terms.
There can be no such thing as unmitigated hatred or unmitigated love. Those who are deeply attached sometimes deliberately present a rough exterior to each other, and that is also one way of enjoying the married state. Some wives in this world show their deepest love only by nagging, and the husbands also enjoy putting on an air of being victims.
You must not forget that everyone is acting a part all the time, knowingly or unknowingly. But God, who sees everything, must be aware of their thoughts and the secret ecstasies of companionship of even that captain and his wife. So don't make the mistake of thinking that they were not properly matched, judging merely from conversation overheard. Do you know, at the end, though his death was sudden, with the last flicker of consciousness he worried about his wife and how she was going to manage without him.
Do you know what she did when she came over and saw him? She stood looking at the body without a word or a tear, and when others tried to comfort her said, "Leave me alone." After that she went back to the circus tent, climbed to the top where the swings were clamped, took out one, took a full swing up and down, and when the swing touched the ceiling, let go her hold. Jubilee seemed to have become a self-explanatory word. When Captain started the publicity for his special Jubilee show, no one questioned it, although his wife continued to taunt him.
Announcements were made through colorful lithographed posters pasted on every wall in Malgudi. You could find the posters stuck side by side, starting from Albert Mission College compound wall, the first available wall when you turn townward from the circus grounds, on which was originally to be seen the bold stenciled warning, "Bill stickers will be prosecuted." Captain's men had come back to consult him about it, and Captain advised, "Stick the posters well over their warning and that will make it lawful.
If we are questioned, we shall send complimentary passes to the principal and professors." He had planned to put up a few more special ringside seats to take care of all possible objectors and obstructors, from the sanitary department to the jail superintendent, who could have created trouble for Captain at any stage. Though law-abiding in a general sense, he had contempt for what he felt were silly objections. This was not the time for one to be finicky. He had to make use of the sprawling central jail walls, paint over them his Jubilee messages in giant lettering so that travelers journeying on the highway could not miss them.
He had always felt that such walls were going to waste and should be utilized properly. He differed from those whom he considered a bunch of eccentrics, calling themselves Town Arts Council, who were opposed to every kind of announcement and hoarding, never realizing that they were thus cramping our economic life and ultimate prosperity. When his plans were opposed, he had his own technique of winning over opposition: a few complimentary tickets, not always for VIP seats. He had a few seats for semi-VIPs and non-VIPs, accommodation in rattan chairs, wooden chairs, and galleries, depending upon the status of those to be favored.
When mere tickets would not work, he donated cash from a fund he had earmarked as birthday gifts in his account books, and income tax really questioned whose birthday. He invaded every blank space in town to advertise the Jubilee. Starting with Albert Mission College, as we have seen, to the end of Abu Lane which splintered off from Alaman Street, the last outpost of Malgudi eastward, every kind of wall, of shops, schools, houses, and hotels, proclaimed the Jubilee of the Grand Malgudi Circus, displaying Rita in death-defying trapeze acts, the chimp riding a motorcycle,
the tusker carrying on its back the chimp dressed as a Maharaja with crown and all, a giraffe doing something or the other, and clowns tumbling. At every corner people stood staring at the wall. Even those in a hurry to go to work paused to read the notice.
Not a single soul was left in doubt about the coming Jubilee celebrations of the circus. In the same manner, the countryside was also informed by the usual team of clowns with extra noise of drums. As a result of this publicity, the box office presented an air of a besiegement on the opening day.
Every inch of the auditorium was occupied for all the 3 shows each day, noon, evening and night. Captain reserved the Tiger's act for the night show. It came after Rita's trapeze act, somersaults, and dive through a fire ring.
When the Tiger was wheeled in and the enclosure was erected around the ring, Captain, dressed in satin breeches and a glittering vest, holding the whip in hand, appeared before the audience in a kind of light-skipping movement, bowed to the public deeply in all directions, and introduced, "Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to see our Raja perform an act which I have named 4 in 1, which is actually a symphony in movement, as you will notice when the band plays. I have composed it with a lot of forethought. It's a sequence of precise acts, timed properly, which sense of time is displayed uncannily by Raja.
He will go through the act with precision, and finish the sequence as befits a country dedicated to non-violence, with a sip of milk in the company of a goat. I'd now appeal to you, ladies and gentlemen, to watch this act unwinkingly, keep your eyes open and your nerves cool, never fear for a moment that Raja will ever overstep the bounds in any manner." After this speech, which created suspense and anticipation in the audience, he let me out of the cage, opening the door with his own hand. He carried nothing more than his whip. He had put away even the chair.
He wished to demonstrate that he was absolutely confident of his authority over me and had nothing to fear. He cracked his whip in the air twice to start me off. I galloped around the ring, while he watched with a side glance at his stopwatch, keeping himself deftly at a distance just a foot beyond my pouncing range, but always close to an emergency exit.
The audience watched in absolute silence without stirring. I too caught the atmosphere and enjoyed showing off my talent. When the rounds were completed, the hurdles and mazes and labyrinths appeared at the appropriate places, and then rings of flames at some points, followed by the item of the goat and the milk.
My mouth watered at the sight of the goat, but Captain was very careful to crack his whip and drive me back to the cage, unobtrusively, when he noticed it. No one had witnessed such a composite and complex act before. When the applause subsided, Captain came forward and said, "Sorry, gentlemen, no encore is practical for this particular act. nor am I in a position to ask Raja to take the bow personally.
I'll have to do it on his behalf. But I also hope someday I'll educate him in proper manners to respond to his adoring public, and more applause. The
4-in-1 act and the fiery dive of the trapeze artists were very popular and brought Captain great fame. His box office collection soared, and apart from that his admirers showered on him cash and presents of all kinds. He had done something original and really creative in the annals of circus, and no one could repeat or imitate his program. The success was entirely due to Captain's genius.
Jubilee, going on and on, each week bringing in more crowds than ever. Captain looked particularly happy and ordered an extra ration for all the animals every day. He was careful not to overfeed any animal that had, like myself, difficult acts to perform, keep Raja light, and feed him well at the end of his act, late at night.
If he becomes heavy, he won't be fit to run through his act so smartly, with the result that they hardly fed me until midnight, when all my duty was done. This compulsory fasting the whole day kept me always hungry, and made it more and more difficult to accept the milk in the goat's company. Thus it went on day after day, week after week, for a very long time.
One evening I had just gone through all the turns preceding the milk, run with and without hurdles and through fire, and was sitting before the pan of milk. As a piece of courtesy to a weaker companion, the goat must be allowed to seep the milk first. He now had great confidence in me and took me for granted, rather a risky thing to do.
I sat up watching him, assuming as benign a look as possible since the slightest frown on my face might bring the whip down, Captain being watchful as ever. As the goat bent down and stretched its neck to reach the milk in the pan, I felt a powerful impulse to seize that smooth white neck held out so temptingly. The agony of self-control was worse than the raging hunger. The gluttonous goat was lapping up the milk.
How lovely it'd be to put one's teeth to it and go off to the bamboo bush to a leisurely meal. Forest memories overwhelmed me while that silly goat was relishing its milk, as if he had never tasted it before. If only he had lifted his head, withdrawn even slightly, out of my reach, the world would have heard a different story.
As it happened, the temptation stayed too long. Holding myself back seemed impossible. Captain, reading my mind, was more alert than ever. He cracked his whip as a warning and commanded me to share the milk while the goat was still at it. But I hated that milk more than ever, and was delaying the unpleasant task.
Normally when Captain fixed his look on me, I'd be nearly paralyzed, and obey. But now, suddenly he had to look away, when he heard a commotion in the auditorium as someone fell off the top rung of a gallery. I chose this moment to shoot forward and nip off the goat's head.
There were shouts and cries and confusion from a section nearby for a minute, and Captain whipped me hard, picked up his chair, hit me with it, and drove me back to my cage. The goat was finished, but of no use to me whatever, as it was snatched away out of sight at once and the place was cleaned and cleared as if nothing unusual had happened. Among the several thousands in the hall, a handful in the front row had noticed the end of the goat, but they were dignified VIPs who would not normally scream even if they noticed a fire or murder.
Before the general spectators in the hall could know what was happening, I was back in my cage. The men had cleared the place very quickly, efficient men behind a curtain drawn all around, and the next item came on without delay as if nothing had happened. 4 of our best clowns, along with the chimp in tuxedo and wearing spectacles, came on the stage with their special charms and jugglery, and completely diverted the minds of the audience so that no question was asked as to how the preceding item had ended.
Meanwhile, I must say I had become unpopular with Captain. He shunned me for a few days and dropped my acts completely from his announcements, explaining to the audience in one of his speeches, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to say that Raja's acts have to be suspended for a few days as he has distemper and needs rest and isolation." Rest and isolation meant starving to me. They gave me neither food nor water for 3 days on end, Captain's usual method of chastening one's temper.
I wished I could have explained that what I had done was due to robust health and hunger and in no way to be described as distemper. Distemper indeed. If they had left me alone, I could have helped them forget the existence of the goat completely. At least they should have let me finish off my prize. I had thought I would take it to my cage.
What right did he have to starve me? I felt enraged at the thought of Captain and his allies and wished the iron bars could yield, and then I could show them another way to celebrate the jubilee. The isolation hurt me most. I had got used to the company of that wonderful chimp and all the good fellows, gossiping among ourselves from our confinements or tether posts.
However, the chimp sneaked in beside my cage unobserved when Captain was away on some business in the town and the keepers were relaxing. He said, "What had come over you?" "I was hungry, that's all," I said. "How can you eat a friend with whom you had been on milk-drinking terms, however hungry you might be?" Though I am sorry for the poor goat, for he was mild and inoffensive, I'm glad to say that it's done us some good.
Captain is talking of closing the Jubilee shows and resting for a few days. I was there when he was talking to his wife at breakfast and she said, "The first wise act in your life." We are all at breaking point, I'm sure. He didn't dispute her remark as he normally would, but remained moody and gave me a cup of tea to wash down a buttered toast.
It was so good. Why can't you also eat these things, so much better than your normal preferences? You'll be a good fellow if you learn to eat things that don't move or breathe, and then people will not blame you, but accept you in society and have you around without these iron bars.
Then you will be popular, not feared. If you are hungry, I can bring you a banana and some nuts sometimes. Many visitors bring me a lot. I can't eat all of it. Listening to him made me feel worse.
I said, "Don't talk about food, unless you can get me what I can eat. It's no use talking about it. Your talk makes my hunger worse." And the chimp went away with a leer.
I was in no mood for jokes. I suffered hunger another day. When I was lying half dead, Captain came up, peered in through the bars, and said to his companion, "Take a look at him now."
Not at his best. He is under treatment for his misconduct. I hope he has learnt a lesson. Put up another goat before him and see what he can do.
That was a magnificent shot I took in 16mm. I was lucky to be there in time to take it. I don't think you could ever repeat it.
1 in a million situation. As I watched, he was so quick no one could have noticed his action. His head shot up like a cobra's and he just pecked at that goat.
But it was snap action, neat, precise like a surgeon's. That man was so full of enthusiasm and praise for me that he became incoherent and could hardly complete a sentence. Captain said, "So what? You don't seem to appreciate it." It'd be an impossible, unbelievably perfect shot, the kind of thing that a film director would be dreaming about.
I shall treasure the shot I've taken and use it somewhere, and if it gets an award in any international film show, don't be surprised. Raja is my tiger, and I want a royalty for a show by him. The other laughed as if he had heard a humorous statement, and then said, "Captain, ever since I saw Raja's surgical performance on the goat, I have been thinking of a story in which I could put him to proper use." "I have to think it over," said the captain. "I can't give an instant yes or no. I want 2 days. But I can't force you to give a reply."
Think it over, and understand that I can give you a handsome offer. But don't starve him further. Feed him.
He is magnificent, don't spoil him. You have no idea how he will look in color. He took another long look at me and said, "Raja the Great, I am sure you will cooperate with us." Both of them went away.
I heard the tinkling of the bucket handle and stood expectantly. My food was come. An attendant placed meat and water in the other half of the cage, locked it, and pulled open the partition.
I gave a roar of pleasure, and attained a feeling of well-being very soon. I was able to pace up and down the entire length of the cage in a happy state of mind. Captain spoke to his wife about the filmmaker that night.
After the Jubilee, he was going through a period of rest for 2 weeks before starting preparations to move on to Trichy, the next camp. This was just the time when Captain could enjoy a little domestic felicity. Go to bed early and find time to talk to his wife.
When he mentioned the film proposal, she asked, "What exactly is Raja expected to do?" "I'll know it soon, but I must know first of all whether we should consider the proposal at all." "I'll say nothing until I know what you are going to say." "Why?" "So that I may save you the trouble of contradicting me." They were in a pleasant mood of banter without acrimony or any relevance. She asked, "Can they handle Raja?" "They can't. The idea seems to be that they will tell me what they want, and I get Raja to do it." She remained in deep thought for a while and said, "I don't know, I've always hated that brute.
Seems undependable. I feel uneasy whenever you are out with him." Captain laughed at her fears. "Let me say he is more docile than a Siamese cat.
However, I'm not asking for a testimonial, but whether we should consider the film proposal at all. Yes, if he will buy this little cat off your hands. Nothing of the kind, my dear, I won't part with him as long as I run a circus. I'm looking for another goat to train, until then Raja can be used elsewhere. Another poor goat to be made into a ghost, was all that she could say. Shocking it was.
I realized that if you relax even for a split second, God knows what he will do. The way he glares. I feel more easy with your lions. They are noble and gentle. I don't know why you should not be satisfied with their work, and want to bother about this tiger or any tiger.
Single quote. Given a chance, the lion can also bifurcate a goat. Don't take too harsh a view of Raja for it.
He didn't do it out of malevolence, but a sudden impulse of mischief. That's a way of life in their jungle society. What an explanation, she cried. I don't know if you will ever listen to me. All the time I do nothing but listen.
Anyway, the main question is whether Raja should be lent for film work at all. However, there is time to think it over. Instead of idling his time. The filmmaker, whose visiting card, embossed on a thin sandalwood strip that filled Captain's office with fragrance, said, Madhusudan, cine director and producer, came in as promised on the third day.
Captain said, the scent of your visiting card heralds your arrival even before you appear. That's my intention, Captain G. If you keep it in your table drawer, you will not forget me. Call me Madan. Captain showed him a chair.
I'm a TT, but I can get you a drink, if you would like that sort of thing.